It was one of those weekends when the family group chat wouldn't stop buzzing. Pictures of balloons, tables being decorated, and cousins sharing their excitement filled the screen. My phone kept lighting up with message after message, and at first, I didn't think much of it. Family gatherings were always a big deal in my mom's house. She loved organizing events, and everyone knew that when she planned something, she made it big, grand decorations, plenty of food, music, games for the kids, and the kind of chaos only a huge family could create. For years, I had been used to it, sometimes even rolling my eyes at how much effort she put into these things. But this time, something felt different. As I scrolled through the messages, I noticed something odd. Everyone was talking about how their kids were excited, how they couldn't wait to see their cousins, how the little ones were already picking out their clothes for the party. My sister sent a photo of her daughter holding a sparkly dress. My cousin joked about how his son was already practicing his dance moves, and the flood of comments and laughing emojis followed. But as I read along, a sinking feeling started to grow inside me. There was no mention of my daughter. Not one word. I tried to brush it off. Maybe it was just an oversight. Maybe my mom hadn't gotten around to mentioning everyone yet. But deep down, I already felt it, that tug in my chest that told me something wasn't right. The more I read, the more obvious it became. Everyone else's child had been invited. Every cousin, every grandchild. Except mine. I stared at my phone in disbelief. My first instinct was denial. Surely, I must have missed the message where my mom included my daughter. I scrolled back, reread the threads, checked for her name, for anything that pointed to her being included. But there was nothing. My heart started pounding harder with every passing second. The realization was like a slow, cold wave washing over me. The house was quiet except for the sound of my daughter humming to herself in the next room. She was coloring, completely unaware of what was unfolding on my phone screen. I remember glancing at her, her small figure hunched over the table, carefully choosing colors, her little world safe and innocent. And yet, here I was, trying to process the fact that she had been deliberately left out of the one place where she should have belonged without question. I felt anger rising, but also confusion. Why? Why her? What had she done? What had I done? I wanted to call my mom immediately, to demand an explanation, but at the same time, I was paralyzed. My hands shook as I held the phone, and instead of dialing, I just sat there staring at the screen, rereading the words from my relatives. The kids are going to love this. The little ones are going to have the time of their lives. Over and over, those sentences burned into my mind, each one a reminder that my daughter was not counted among them. The clock ticked loudly in the background, though maybe it only felt that way because my head was spinning. I could picture the party in my mind, the tables lined with food, the children running around laughing, cousins hugging each other, music playing loudly, my mom proudly hosting. And in that picture, there was a glaring hole where my daughter should have been. The thought of her not being there, of her being the only one left out, twisted something deep inside me. My throat tightened as I imagined what would happen if she found out. How would I explain to her that Grandma had planned a big celebration for all the children, but not for her? How could I let her face that kind of hurt, that kind of rejection? The very idea made my chest ache. She was just a child. She didn't deserve this. I tried to convince myself it had to be a mistake. Maybe my mom had overlooked it in the rush of planning. Maybe the invitation was on its way. But my gut told me otherwise. My mom was meticulous with these things. She never forgot anyone. If she had wanted my daughter there, she would have said so from the beginning. I put my phone down and picked it up again countless times, unsure of what to do. A mix of dread and disbelief consumed me. The reality was hard to accept, but the truth was staring me in the face. In a huge extended family party, organized by my own mother, my daughter was the only child who wasn't invited. When the day of the party finally came, I did everything I could to keep things feeling normal at home. My daughter, still blissfully unaware of what was happening in the extended family, woke up early, excited simply because it was the weekend. She came bouncing into my room with her hair a little messy, holding her favorite stuffed animal, asking if we could make pancakes together. I forced a smile, hiding the heaviness in my chest, and told her of course we could. I clung to that moment, the simple joy of her laughter in the kitchen, the way she stood on her little stool to help me stir the batter. But the entire time, my mind was somewhere else, constantly reminding me that across town, cousins were dressing up, preparing for a grand celebration where my daughter was not welcome. As the morning stretched on, messages from relatives poured in again. Pictures of kids in shiny dresses and neatly pressed shirts filled the group chat. My sister sent a video of her son grinning ear to ear, saying how excited he was to play with everyone. The sound of his laughter coming from my phone cut into me, sharp and unrelenting. I quickly put it face down on the counter, not wanting my daughter to see. She had no idea, and I wanted desperately to keep it that way. But children notice things. They feel shifts in the air, even if you don't spell them out. At one point, while spreading syrup on her pancake, she looked up at me with her wide eyes and asked, "Mom, why is everyone dressed up today? Is there something special happening?" My hands froze for a moment, the knife suspended above the plate. I forced a calm smile and told her I wasn't sure, maybe just a family get-together. She nodded, accepting my answer, but my heart sank because I knew the questions wouldn't stop there. By afternoon, as the party went into full swing, my phone kept buzzing with more updates, more photos. Relatives laughing, tables lined with food, children holding balloons, a banner stretched across the backyard. I could hear my daughter in the living room, singing softly to herself as she played with her dolls, completely oblivious to the world she had been left out of. Then it happened. She walked over to me, clutching one of her dolls to her chest, and asked with the kind of innocence only a child could have, "Mom, why didn't Grandma invite me? Everyone else is there. Why not me?" Those words hit me harder than I could ever have imagined. It was one thing for me to notice, for me to feel angry and betrayed. It was another thing entirely to hear it from her, her small voice trembling with a mix of sadness and confusion. She looked at me as if I held all the answers, as if I could explain why her grandmother had chosen to exclude her. And I had nothing. My throat tightened instantly, and I had to fight back tears. I knelt down to her level, placing my hands on her tiny shoulders. Her eyes were glistening, her lips pressed together as if she was holding back more questions. "Did I do something wrong?" she whispered. That was the moment my heart shattered into pieces. No child should ever have to wonder if they were somehow not good enough to be loved by their family. I wanted to scream, to demand the universe explain how anyone, especially my own mother, could make my daughter feel this way. Instead, I pulled her into my arms and held her tightly. She smelled like strawberries from the shampoo she loved, and as I held her, I silently promised myself that I would never let her carry this burden alone. But even as I comforted her, she pulled back slightly and searched my face for reassurance, needing me to tell her the truth. I gave her the gentlest words I could, but I could see she didn't fully believe me. Children know when something isn't right, and she knew it in her bones. For the rest of the evening, she stayed close to me. She tried to distract herself with her toys, with cartoons on TV, but her eyes kept drifting back to my phone whenever it buzzed. I could tell she was imagining what was happening at the party. She didn't say it out loud again, but the question lingered in the air, unspoken but heavy. Why wasn't I invited? As the evening unfolded, I realized the silence from my family spoke louder than any words ever could. Nobody called to ask where we were, nobody checked in to see if my daughter was coming, and not one person questioned her absence. In a family as large as ours, you would expect at least one relative to notice, to pick up the phone and say, "Hey, why isn't she here?" But the phone stayed silent, and the absence of her name in every conversation made it painfully clear that this exclusion was not an accident, it was accepted. I kept checking the group chat, half hoping someone would mention us, half dreading that they wouldn't. The pictures kept rolling in, kids playing games, cousins gathered for group photos, laughter spilling into every caption. I could see my mother in the background of some of the pictures, smiling proudly, her arms stretched wide as if she was the queen of her own celebration. My daughter glanced at one of the photos when she passed by, and though I quickly locked my phone, it was too late. She had already seen her cousins holding balloons, their faces lit with joy, and the way her eyes dimmed in that moment broke something inside me. What unsettled me most was the collective silence. My siblings, my cousins, the aunts and uncles, all of them knew. They saw every child gathered there, and they knew one was missing. Yet not a single person had the courage to say, "Wait, where is she?" Not one person thought it necessary to speak up for her, to remind my mother that she had a granddaughter who mattered just as much as the rest. The quiet complicity of it all was almost worse than the exclusion itself. It wasn't just my mother's choice anymore. It was the whole family's acceptance of that choice. The more I thought about it, the heavier it felt. Family was supposed to be about standing together, about protecting one another, about never letting a child feel alone. And yet here we were, with an entire household full of relatives pretending nothing was wrong. That kind of silence doesn't happen by accident. It happens when people decide it's easier to go along with things than to confront them. It happens when people choose comfort over what is right. As the night dragged on, I could feel the weight of being isolated within my own family. It was as though there was an invisible wall, separating me and my daughter from the rest of them. They were inside, bathed in lights, music, and laughter, while we were outside, sitting in a quiet living room, pretending not to notice the emptiness. I thought about my daughter's small voice earlier, asking me why she wasn't invited, and it stung even more knowing that nobody in that house full of people seemed to care enough to ask the same question. There were moments when I imagined one of my siblings sneaking away to call me, to apologize, to say, "I don't agree with this." But the phone never rang. Instead, my screen stayed filled with updates that flaunted the very thing my daughter had been denied: belonging. I felt a bitter mix of anger and sadness coursing through me. It wasn't just about the party anymore. It was about the message that silence sent. By saying nothing, they had all agreed my daughter didn't matter enough to include. I sat there replaying family memories in my head, times when we had all rallied together for smaller things: birthdays, graduations, even simple barbecues in the backyard. Back then, everyone was quick to boast about how family means everything. But when it came to the moment that truly tested that belief, when it came to standing up for one child's right to be treated equally, their silence told me exactly where we stood. Every ping of a new photo felt like another nail in the coffin of trust. The images showed togetherness, joy, unity, but to me, they were reminders of betrayal. I looked at my daughter curled up on the couch with her doll, her eyes glued to the TV, but I knew she was thinking about what she wasn't saying out loud. She was smart enough to understand what silence meant, even if she couldn't fully put it into words yet. That was the cruelest part, watching her learn, far too early, that sometimes the people who should protect you the most are the very ones who choose to stay quiet. The weight of everything pressed heavily on me as I tried to navigate my role in this situation. On one side, I was still a daughter, raised to respect and honor my mother, the very woman who had brought me into this world. On the other side, I was a mother myself now, entrusted with the fragile heart of a little girl who looked at me for protection, comfort, and truth. Those roles collided in a way I had never experienced before, tearing me between loyalty to the woman who raised me and the responsibility I carried toward the child I was raising. It is one thing to argue with your parents about small disagreements, choices about careers, opinions on parenting styles, differences in lifestyle. But this was different. This wasn't about me, this was about my daughter. A child who had no voice in the matter, a child who couldn't stand up for herself, a child who didn't understand why she had been cast aside. Every time I replayed her words in my mind, did I do something wrong? I felt the responsibility weighing heavier. No matter what the reason was, my duty was clear. I had to protect her from the harm that came, even when it came from family. Yet protecting her meant confronting my mother, and that thought made my stomach churn. For as long as I could remember, my mother's word carried authority in our family. She was the center of everything, the organizer, the one who made the rules everyone quietly followed. To question her, to stand against her decision, would be seen as defiance. It would put me in the position of being labeled difficult, disrespectful, maybe even ungrateful. And the truth is, a part of me still craved her approval, the way I had as a child. But that craving couldn't outweigh the look in my daughter's eyes when she asked why she wasn't wanted. I tried to imagine what it would look like if I stayed silent, if I let this pass. What would it teach my daughter? That her pain didn't matter? That being excluded by her own grandmother was something she just had to accept? That her mother would sit quietly because speaking up was too hard? I couldn't accept that. Silence might preserve my relationship with my mother, but it would fracture the bond one had with my daughter. And if I was forced to choose between the two, there was no choice at all. But the clash of those roles still tore at me. I thought about my childhood, about the sacrifices my mother made, the things she did for us when we were young. I thought about the times I had gone to her for advice, the way I had leaned on her during difficult seasons of my own life. To stand against her now felt almost unnatural, like betraying the very foundation I had been raised on. Yet, every time doubt crept in, I remembered the sight of my daughter's face, the way her shoulders slumped when she realized she wasn't part of the celebration. There were moments I wondered if my mother even realized the magnitude of what she had done. Maybe to her, it was just an oversight, or maybe she thought she had a valid reason, something that made sense in her own mind. But intention didn't erase the impact. Whether she meant it or not, she had hurt a child. My child. And the silence of the rest of the family only magnified the wound. I wrestled with what to say, how to say it, and whether I could ever make my mother understand. I imagined standing in front of her, telling her that what she did was cruel, that it broke not just my daughter's heart, but mine as well. I imagined her reaction, perhaps defensiveness, perhaps denial, maybe even anger. But I also knew I couldn't let fear of her response hold me back. I owed my daughter more than that. Inside me, two voices battled. One whispered, "Don't cause conflict. Don't upset your mother. Keep the peace." The other screamed, "If you don't speak now, your daughter will learn that even her mother couldn't protect her." That was the battle of roles I carried inside me, the clash between being a daughter conditioned to obey and a mother determined to defend. Eventually, the moment I had been dreading became unavoidable. I couldn't carry the weight of the silence any longer, and the questions in my daughter's eyes pushed me forward. I picked up the phone, hesitated, and put it down again more times than I could count. My fingers hovered over the call button, trembling slightly, as if pressing it would unleash something I could never take back. But finally, with my chest tight and my heart racing, I dialed my mother's number. She answered with the same cheerful tone she always had, her voice filled with the background noise of the party still going on. I could hear laughter, music, and the chatter of relatives all around her. For a second, I almost froze, almost convinced myself to end the call before she even knew I had dialed. But I stayed quiet until she said my name, her voice curious, but still distracted. That was when the words burst out, sharper than I had intended, driven by the pain that had been building inside me. "Why wasn't my daughter invited?" I asked. There was no small talk, no soft lead-in. The question came out raw, heavy, and loaded with every ounce of confusion and anger I had been holding back. There was a pause on the other end, brief but enough to send chills down my spine. She didn't answer right away, and that silence told me more than words ever could. When she finally spoke, her tone was measured, almost defensive. She said something about logistics, about how many children there were, about how difficult it was to manage everyone. She spoke as if it were a matter of numbers, as though my daughter had simply been left out of an equation. I felt my jaw tighten, my grip on the phone unyielding. "Every other child is there," I reminded her, my voice shaking now. "Every cousin, every niece, every nephew. So why was mine the only one excluded?" There was another pause, longer this time. I could picture her standing in the middle of the party, surrounded by balloons and laughter, suddenly aware of the confrontation she couldn't avoid. When she finally responded, her words were clipped, defensive. She muttered something about differences, about how my daughter sometimes didn't blend well with the rest, about how it was easier this way. Those words burned into me, each syllable slicing deeper. Easier for who? Certainly not for my daughter, who sat at home questioning whether she had done something wrong. I could feel anger rising in me, hot and uncontrollable, but beneath it all was hurt. Hurt that my own mother, the woman I had trusted all my life, would speak so casually about excluding her own granddaughter. I wanted to scream, to demand she explain herself properly, to tell her exactly what her decision had done to my little girl. But my voice caught in my throat, tangled between the urge to shout and the urge to cry. The confrontation stretched into a tense silence again, both of us waiting for the other to give in. In the background, I could still hear the sounds of children playing, their laughter ringing in my ears like a cruel reminder. My daughter's cousins were running free in a place that should have been hers too, while she sat at home wondering why she wasn't wanted. The contrast was unbearable. Finally, I told her what she had done. I told her how my daughter had asked me if she had done something wrong, how she had looked at me with those sad eyes, searching for an explanation I couldn't give. My voice cracked as I said it, but I needed her to understand. For a moment, there was nothing from her side of the line, just silence, and then the faint sound of someone calling her name in the background. She said she had to go, that she would talk to me later, and, just like that, the call ended. I stood there, holding the phone to my ear long after the line had gone dead, staring into the emptiness of the room. My chest felt heavy, my hands trembling slightly as I lowered the phone. My daughter peeked into the room then, her innocent eyes searching my face as if she could sense the storm that had just passed between me and my mother. That night, after the party had ended and the laughter from across town had faded into silence, I sat quietly in the living room, watching my daughter sleep on the couch. She had fallen asleep curled against her stuffed animal, her tiny hand resting gently over its worn fabric, her breathing steady and soft. She looked so peaceful, yet all I could see was the heaviness she had carried earlier, the question in her eyes that no child should ever have to ask. I brushed a strand of hair from her face, and in that moment, I knew with absolute certainty that my role as her mother was not just about giving her food, shelter, and education. It was about protecting her dignity. Even when it meant standing against the very people who raised me. The events of that day replayed in my mind over and over. My mother's words, the silence of my siblings, the group photos filled with smiling faces, all of it weighed on me like an anchor. But the image that struck me the hardest was the one of my daughter sitting on the edge of her bed earlier, her eyes lowered, her voice small when she asked if she had done something wrong. That memory pierced through every other thought. Because in that moment, she wasn't just a child excluded from a party, she was a little girl questioning her own worth. And that was something I could never allow to continue. If my mother had chosen to disregard her, if the family had chosen to stay silent, then it was on me to show her that she was valuable, cherished, and seen. I realized that my responsibility wasn't just to comfort her in the moment, but to teach her through my actions what self-respect looks like, what it means to demand fairness, and what it means to stand tall even when the people closest to you try to diminish your place. I thought about what it meant to be part of a family. For years, I had held on to the idea that family meant unconditional love, that no matter what mistakes were made or differences existed, we would always stand together. But that day had shown me a truth I didn't want to face. Family ties can sometimes become chains that silence you, chains that keep you accepting harm just because of blood. Protecting my daughter meant breaking those chains, even if it left me standing on the outside. I imagined the future, the kind of woman my daughter might grow into. Would she carry this memory as a scar, or would she carry it as a lesson? That depended on how I chose to respond. If I stayed quiet, she would learn that silence is the price you pay for belonging. But if I stood up, even if it caused rifts, she would learn that her worth is not negotiable, not even to family. She would learn that her voice matters, that her feelings are valid, and that she never has to accept being treated as less. In the stillness of the night, I understood that the love I owed my mother as her daughter could not come at the expense of the love and protection I owed my child. Blood may tie us to people, but responsibility ties us to those we bring into the world, those who depend on us to shield them from pain they cannot yet fight on their own. My daughter was not just my child, she was my reflection, my legacy, and my greatest duty. And if defending her meant clashing with the woman who raised me, then that was the price I would pay. I reached out and held her small hand as she slept, her fingers curling slightly around mine in a quiet instinct of trust. That grip reminded me that she had no one else to turn to, no one else to stand in her corner, but me. She needed me to show her that even when the people you expect to love you most turn away, you do not lose your value. You do not shrink yourself to fit their choices. You rise, you protect yourself, and you move forward with your head held high.